Hello viewer, the Nameless Scholar here. No setting is free from my grasp. So, Ronnie's ending, The Age of Stars, is considered to be the best, the true and honest ending of Elden Ring. What if I told you that's nonsense? And in this video, I'm here to tell you why I am sick and tired of people saying that the ending, which involves the blue manipulative doll, is the best ending, and if no one will call out Ronnie, then
I will!
firstly, Ranni the Witch is an unreliable narrator. A lot of Ronnie's supporters will say that the ending is mistranslated and she actually wants to sever the lands between from the control of the greater will, not only bringing about an age of stars, but also essentially bring about Friedrich Nietzsche's Übermensch by taking away her order and essentially forming her own shadow government to observe the lands between from afar, essentially looking at Elden Ring like it is a story written by Kentaro Miura. Okay, the translation might be off and all, but you can fix the translation all you want. There are many problems with her rhetoric. Ronnie shows herself as a principled person, that her ends justify the means. However, Elden Ring's main influence is not Kentaro Miura, it is George R. R. Martin. Ronnie shows herself as a principled, grounded person who is willing to do the right thing and presents herself as a hero. Here's the problem with this. Do you know what happens to principled people in George R. R. Martin's works? What happens to Ned Stark happens. What happens to Godfrey happens. What happens to General Radahn happens. What happens to Edgar happens. If anything, Ronnie is like Cersei Lannister than anyone else. Before I get into the many misdeeds of Ranni the Witch, I want to point out that leaving the lands between without something to worship would be disastrous. To quote Carl Jung, you can take away a man's gods, but only to give him others in return. Instead of Marika or the Greater Will, they would instead start worshipping the Flame of Frenzy, which is just Malala meets Gnosticism. The Scarlet Rot, which is just Nurgle by another name and a different color palette. The Formless Mother, which is not corn. The Flame of Ruin, the thing that the giants and the fire monks revere. Godwyn, the Prince of Death himself. Although not an honor god himself, those who live in death influence is creeping to the lands between. One might argue that Ronnie would prevent these from spreading, but something tells me that this sounds more like a speculation with a desire for a militant atheist power fantasy. Which leads me to my point of people looking at Elden Ring like it is a story written mainly by Kentaro Miura. As much as I like him as a director, Miyazaki and many other Berserk fans tend to take the wrong morals from Berserk. The Conviction arc, for example, is pointed as the primary example of Miura being influenced by Nietzsche and Guts essentially being an Übermensch. But that wasn't the point in the grand scheme of things. The whole point of the Conviction arc is to establish the whole point of Guts' character arc. That point being, despite everything he has done, what he has went through, Guts is not the monster he thinks he is. He is still capable of compassion, love, selflessness, begrudgingly admitting that without Puck he would have succumbed to his wounds many times over, and his relationship with Isidro solidifying. Guts being religious or not doesn't matter. What most see in the Conviction arc is Guts being a brute who struggles against his fate as always. That isn't the case. Guts realized that he is not a monster and he's still human. Ranni left her humanity both literally and figuratively, becoming a cold, detached spirit that inhabits a blue doll. People argue that Ranni is forging her own fate and bringing it to the lands between, but this vision is about her order, where she remains detached and establishes essentially her own shadow government, where she can dictate things in her state of being, where she is free from her two fingers and outside the influence of the greater will. Now, onto Ranni's misdeeds. She, alongside Rykard and the Nox, orchestrate the Night of the Black Knives, which led to the assassination of Godwyn the Golden, which led to the forming of Those Who Live in Death, which the Golden Order started hunting those who live in death, who became such with no choice of their own. She was willing to be complicit in the deaths of hundreds, if not thousands, of those who live in death to further her own agenda. We could speculate that after Godwyn died, the Black Knife assassins continued killing other demigods, hence the walking mausoleums, and this led to the Shattering, which the Shattering, many lives were lost, especially during the Battle of Mount Gelmir, where Praetor Rykard's forces turned on one another. Some even fell to despair as the flame of frenzy corrupted them, and the Gelmir Knights went extinct. The Shattering led to Melania release the Scarlet Rot upon Caelid, and essentially bombed around 20% of the lands between with a biological super nuke, killing possibly not just tens of thousands of humans, but hundreds of thousands of animals, and even mutating them into the giant dogs, crows, and the like. Caelid is an example of what would happen if the Scarlet Rot is left unchecked. Meanwhile, Liurnia is collapsing into the Lake of Rot underneath it, and in Altus Plateau rests the deathless body of Godwyn the Golden, spreading deathroot across the land. Ranni is almost single-handedly responsible for the Shattering and its aftermath. Does this sound like a liberator? Or does it sound like a cold-blooded monster who will go to any lengths to achieve her ends? With the collapse of the Golden Order, it's a miracle that the other outer gods haven't been able to break the stalemate. So I ask you, viewer, how much do the ends justify the means? How many more lives must be lost? How much more atrocities must be committed to reach Ranni's utopia, where supposedly everyone will be Übermensch that don't need no greater will? Do you not realize that the promise of utopia was the justification of many brutal regimes throughout history to kill millions upon millions of innocent people? She keeps around a person like Seluvis, who is shunned even by his own kind, and even the genocidal Gideon Ofnir offers the tarnish to get rid of his tonic. I'll come back to this later. And Ranni only betrays Seluvis when he tries to cross her first, and only her. So when it serves her ends, the ends justify the means, but God forbid if one of her subordinates tries to make a play on her. When someone like Gideon Ofnir offers the tarnished to dispose of Seluvis's potion, to protect his adoptive daughter that he cast out, mind you, you really need to consider who your allies are. Anybody who associates with Seluvis cannot possibly be a good person. Now, you could say guilt by association. Sure. This time, however, I know I am right. Because Ranni lets Seluvis do his depraved experiments as long as he hadn't crossed her. Because of this mindset, I would go as far as to say that Ranni uses Blide and Iji as tools and is outright lying when she says that she loves them. She knows both Blide and Iji are loyal to her to a fault, and she uses this to further her own agenda. Does this sound like a person who is principled? What makes you think that a person like this will keep her word and actually bring upon the utopia she promises? These misdeeds and these actions are the reason why she is exactly like Cersei Lannister. She isn't a liberator or a philosopher queen who wants what's best for others, but a cold, power-hungry manipulator who uses her rhetoric to further her own self-interest and will do anything to reach power. Her rhetoric is built upon pillars of salt, with a promise of a Nietzschean utopia. As I have said before, in our world's history, utopias have been used by regimes to justify mass atrocities and her superficial charm. It is implied through her dialogue that Renala was grooming Ranni to become her successor, to become the next queen of Caria. But Ranni shows no interest to rule Caria, so we can discard the notion that Ranni is a philosopher queen. Let's compare her to a fictional, actual philosopher king. Ranni has no vision for how her Age of Stars will be aside from her cryptic dialogue and the aforementioned Nietzschean utopia that it will be a one-man woman doll thing shadow government free from the influence of the greater will, where she will operate from the shadows, preventing something like the shattering from happening again by consolidating all power to her so no one could pull off something like the Knight of the Black Knives against her, just like she did to Marika. There is no philosophical foundation aside from vague lore, Ranni's cryptic dialogue, and the fan interpretation that is most likely correct regarding the Übermensch rhetoric. Now onto the comparison itself. Because Ranni is kept at a very high pedestal, I will keep the standards high and compare Ranni's vision to the vision of one Victor von Doom. Dr. Doom knows he is right. He has a vision of the world where he is in charge, is principled despite accusations of believing the ends justify the means by American superheroes. He has been proven right in other comics, where in one instance he stood before Wakanda's Panther Goddess and she confirms that only in the timeline where Doom is the ruler of Earth is all crime stopped, world hunger solved, and humanity is united, or in Secret Wars, where Doom defeats the Beyonders, uses their powers to make Battle World, a patchwork world made from the remains of multiple universes, and becomes God Emperor Doom, where he achieves the same thing. Although the heroes accuse Doom of believing that the ends justify the means, for Doom, he isn't violating his principles. It's that his principles happen to conflict with that of the American superheroes. His principles being that he is a benevolent philosopher king who is authoritarian, yes, but not a tyrant. Doom does not oppress. Yes, Doom is manipulative, petty, and vindictive, and even then, Doom will keep his word, even towards his enemies, even to Reed Richards, the man he hates above all else. Ranni simply doesn't have Doom's conviction or intellectual grounding, to the point she proves that she is the total opposite by being complicit in Celovis's doll practices and only striking against him when he tries to make a play on her. Because of this, Ranni's rhetoric comes across as shallow. She is not a visionary leader, but a manipulator. And finally, a lot of people who support Ranni support her because not only have they been fooled by her rhetoric, but also because they think that the Greater Will pretends to be a benevolent entity when it is not, alongside misconceptions of another ending. The Greater Will never tries to show itself off as a benevolent entity. This is a misconception that is coming with the bias of what the average rated atheist thinks the Christian God is. The Greater Will is not a benevolent entity, because before humanity, dragons were the guardians of the Elden Ring, but for some reason, their own Elden Lord disappeared, and eventually Marika was chosen as the vessel of the Elden Ring. Do you know who else was chosen as a vessel for the Elden Ring? Malenia. The reason why I am mentioning this is Malenia being chosen as Empyrean means that the Greater Will is ready and even willing to switch human civilization for Scarlet Rot. The only thing the Greater Will wants is the perseverance of order, which is the continuance of life. So if Ranni really did want to sever the lands between from the Greater Will's influence, it wouldn't matter. The Greater Will is as patient as stone, and he can simply take his time to bring his influence again. Added with the fact that she's an unreliable narrator, manipulator, and she is unprincipled. Something doesn't add up here. It's as if for Ranni, all of this is a power grab, and that she simply wants to usurp Marika. Or, guess I'm just jaded and cynical. Or maybe...
I know I am right.